Hi, everybody. Welcome to Think BRICS, your guide to a multipolar world. I'm really pleased to have Danny Haiphong here with us today to discuss the dynamics that are currently going on in our world today in the economic and political front. Danny is a seasoned geopolitical analyst and writer. You can find a lot of his writings on his Substack, and he also has the opportunity to interview and discuss a lot of these relevant geopolitical topics on his YouTube channel as well. Danny, I'm so happy that we got to discuss this today.
It is great to be here, Benjamin. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Sweet. So I wanted to start from the recent tariff news, and I know that with everything going on, it's kind of hard to keep track of the tariff news. So it seems as Trump has declined the tax that's given for goods from China under $800, which was previously not considered under his recent tariff package. So between that and a recent post or a recent call to the to China to actually discuss trade talks further, how do you imagine Trump's tariffs molding in the near future, and particularly with China?
It could go many different ways. On the one hand, there will no doubt be some form, some shape of tariffs on China. This is an extension of his first presidential term, and this was continued under Joe Biden. Actually, Joe Biden under his administration increased tariffs on certain goods upwards of 100%, for example, on electric vehicles, which now the mainstream Western media laments that China is taking over the entire electric vehicle industry and indeed is the number one producer of all automobile vehicles in the world. And this is in large part because China has really focused on developing this kind of industry and has accelerated its industrial capacity in order to fight off the impact of tariffs and find other suitors and other buyers for its automobiles. So, uh, on the one hand, yes, we're going to continue to see some form of tariffs on China. We could even see blanket tariffs on China to a certain degree. But what Donald Trump has done is he's really overplayed his hand. He has gone maximum pressure on China without any understanding that all this has done is accelerate China's process of self reliance. And uh, while there might be some temporary economic shocks to China to come, it is quite clear that even mainstream economists, the big banks, mainly located in Washington and London, are all projecting that China is still going to grow upwards of 4 to 5% this year, maybe slightly lower than its 5% growth target, despite the tariffs. The impact on the United States is likely to be much greater because what the United States needs from China, given the United States' own deindustrialized capacity, is so astronomical. The United States has become so dependent as a consumer society, as one that is dominated by finance and the service sector. It has long ago upended and dismantled its industrial capacity in order to focus on certain priorities like endless war and enriching a very small group of financial oligarchs that sit, as I said before, in the biggest banks in Washington and London. So this has been the trajectory of the United States. And Donald Trump has done what I believe is all that Donald Trump and his administration believe they can do, because Donald Trump campaigned on a promise to end endless wars, to even lessen reliance on economic sanctions around the world, because it was facilitating the fall of the US dollar and a deepening move away by much of the global south from it, because it was being weaponized, for example, against Russia and even in China as well, Iran, and there's 20 plus other countries under some form of US or European backed sanctions. But Donald Trump still sees China's rise as a threat. The United States still believes that it can get ahead in the world, that it can maintain its dominance economically and militarily through economic coercion and war. So tariffs was really the only and is really the only weapon that the Trump administration believes that it can wield and use, and then also package in terms of public relations toward his own domestic political base as a way to satisfy what people really want in the United States, which is they want a better life, they want an improved standard of living. This can be packaged as a first step, as Donald attempted, toward rejuvenating the U.S. economy, while at the same time trying to undercut China's economic development and growth, which the Trump administration, in every single one of his documents, every single one of the documents released, the memos, all of them have said that China's economic rise is the biggest single threat to U.S. national security. So all of this is to say is that we're going to see some form of tariffs on China. Now, whether that remains at 150 plus percent, 100% or more blanket tariffs, that's going to be the question here, because the economic impact, as I said, is going to be dire. We're already seeing products on Amazon. We're seeing certain electronics and things like this, Xbox, their prices are shooting through the roof. There's a lot of worry that the disruption in the supply chain will cause the financial markets to crash. There's a lot of worries about what this will mean for the United States and its role in the world, and what that could do to its economic condition and situation. We already see even U.S. allies like Japan becoming more and more defiant in their opposition to tariffs, because what tariffs really are, when they are blanket like this, they are an attempt to starve the rest of the world from their own ability to industrialize in some fantastical and really delusional objective of reindustrializing the United States. Now, there's no plan for that for the United States. The Donald Trump administration, no one in the political class in the United States has articulated any plan to reindustrialize, because once you decouple and you cut yourself off from the most important economy in the world like China, you're essentially saying that you are going to, quote unquote, go it alone. That's just not how economics works in this stage of development. It is 100% needed that the United States begins to focus on how its economy plays a positive role both in the lives of its own people and the lives of people around the world. But that is not what is happening here. What is happening is that Donald Trump and his administration is seeking to bully other countries into submission, to deindustrialize themselves, and to essentially pay tribute to the United States. And we are seeing more and more that it's not only China, it's many countries around the world are just not going to have it. And it's only going to strengthen what we're going to talk about here, mechanisms and multilateral organizations like BRICS, which are seeking to develop on a fair and just basis.
Yeah, I think you really hit a lot of good points when we were talking about why Trump even began to consider tariffs, and quite frankly, the boomerang effect that it's really going to have on not just his domestic consumers and his base, but also people around the world. Really, you can see that for the United States that he has blanketed tariffs across all these countries around the world, thinking that considering how powerful he thought the dollar was, that it would immediately cause the countries to capitulate to his demands. And he's bragged himself to be a peacemaker on the campaign trail, yet his only actions really are to do what Biden has done in Ukraine onto Russia. And and this is in all, and his main focus of the tariffs are on China for for different a lot of different reasons that are pretty unsubstantiated. The unfortunate effect is that because he did not realize how weak these effects would be, it's only going to boomerang and hurt the consumers. When you see that the middle class wages, and wages in particular, have been stagnant since nearly 1980, and you can see that like you were saying, how the tariff is essentially an added tax. And if you think that it's going to be one way that the United States will not have an effect from this, then you are dead wrong. We already are seeing increased prices, falls in GDP for the first time in 3 years, really, as they've reported it. And countries like China and Canada and the European Union have already begun their own tariffs that will stay on the United States for one very important reason is the uncertainty that Trump provides and what the uncertainty that his administration will have for the next 4 years. The reality of the situation is that the EU and other nations do not trust the United States or Trump, nor do they want to partner with them. All these tariffs are going to do is going to isolate the country even more, while China continues to reorient its economic growth towards its neighbors. And we can see that here, the focusing on the map here of real GDP growth in the ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia, they were growing over 4%, really. And China too is growing growing over 4%. But you compare it with the United States, who grew a measly barely over 1%, European Union even less so. And now the United States has made itself an enemy on all fronts, even to their allies that you can see with these tariffs. So you're 100% right that all this is doing is just further validating that the United States as a country cannot be trusted on its economic policies and what it aims to accomplish with them. Do you think that his strategy from the outset was immediate capitulation, or do you think he wanted to do even more, go into do further means or do even more to get nations to capitulate? And I ask because about with the recent stall in negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal, where Trump threatened sanctions on anyone who buys Iranian oil.
In terms of strategy, there really is only one overarching strategy, and now many people who watch my program and this program probably come from all different political walks of life. And there were many who believed that the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself would represent a shift and a break from the Washington consensus and the endless wars that the United States has been waging all around the world, and a retreat from what many people are now calling globalism or globalization. Or the truth, however, is that regardless of the semantics, there really is one objective that the United States as an empire has. And this objective is to maintain its dominant position in the world, to maintain its hegemony, which Donald Trump has never said he wanted to retreat from at all. He's never uttered that. Sometimes we've had Marco Rubio talk about, oh, this is a multipolar world now, but no one in his administration, not Donald Trump himself, has ever said that he wanted to be a normal country, one that operates as an equal with the rising powers around the world, as well as the rest of the world for that matter. So the objective is, we have to ask why. Why is the objective to maintain dominance? Well, this is what satisfies and ultimately gives the United States unfettered access and control over the world economic market, so that its corporations, its monopolies, its financial cartels and banks are able to maximize their own profit shares and ensure that any alternative, any competitor, as they would see it, is not able to rise to the position of a leader. Because if that occurs, like what's happening with China, for example, then the isolation and the continued decline of the United States as an economic player in the world will only accelerate. And so that is the writing on the wall. That is the big crisis that the United States as an empire faces, and its rulers and its elites and its oligarchs face. And ultimately, the strategy is throw anything at the wall and hope that it sticks, which is why we've seen the Trump administration, Donald Trump, come into what was an absolute crisis of legitimacy that the Biden administration left him. I mean, this is just the reality. You had a regional war in West Asia spearheaded by the U.S. support of Israel's absolute onslaught and genocidal onslaught on Gaza and the Palestinian people, which turned into a regional war. And then, of course, you mentioned Ukraine, this ongoing dangerous confrontation of the United States against Russia. And you had the continued encirclement and threats against China toward war, not least with the complete neglect of the ordinary person, of the common people, as people in China may say, in the United States and the Western world. They were completely left to dry. And this is what Donald Trump inherited. This is the crisis of legitimacy the United States faced. And so tariffs really are only one aspect of a regime of endless war, which we could see as the most desperate kind of weapon that the Trump administration is trying to utilize. Because, as I said before, it is not about industrializing. It's not about bringing jobs back. It's not about creating jobs. If that were the case, the United States would be operating as a normal country, trying to figure out how to adjust and become a complementary player in the supply chain, and then reinvest those trillions of dollars that are going toward so-called national security, toward defense, that are going toward bank bailouts, that are going toward empire, and reinvest them in the United States and the problems that the world faces, which the United States just so happens, because it is the hegemon and the empire, it just so happens to be the root cause of most of the world's biggest crises at this time. So that it would be the that would be what it would look like for the United States to actually uh, devise an actual strategy toward addressing this crisis of legitimacy. But what Donald Trump has done is he's doubled down on what he and his administration and the people that has backed his administration, the Peter Thiels of the world, the BlackRocks, if you look at Scott Bessent,
Yep.
Soros, these people, um, they see tariffs as really, again, the only weapon left at the disposal of the U.S. empire that isn't been there, done that. So the Trump administration has to maintain an illusion that it is acting as a different kind of player politically than his predecessor, which is why he relies so much on comparing himself to who came before him, Joe Biden. But all this is to say is that there really is, when it comes to strategy, it's really about an objective. The objective is to maintain unfettered dominance over the planet's resources, the economic landscape, and the military power necessary to maintain that. But uh, there really is no there is no plan for this, because the United States is really at work right now as an empire, trying to do all of it at the same time. It's trying to use sanctions, economic coercion. You brought up Iran. It has threatened. The Trump administration has threatened secondary sanctions and will likely go along with those secondary sanctions, which is really targeting China on Iranian oil. So China is, Iran is one of its biggest oil partners, and secondary sanctions are really targeting not just Iran, but China. He's doubled down on sanctions against Russia, has not lifted those. No else in the world have sanctions been lifted. Tariffs are just another form of economic warfare. And of course, we see, for example, the ongoing onslaught in Gaza and West Asia. We see the U.S. bombing campaign on Yemen. And we see, which not many people are talking about, the explosion of military exercises in the Pacific, the Bikaton 2025 exercises with the Philippines, Japan, and other countries participating with U.S. hardware to prepare for war with China. So not much has really changed, and this is the overall strategy. It hasn't really altered one bit. The only thing that has changed, in truth, is that the United States is now talking to Russia. That is really all that has changed, and it's talking to Russia because it has to talk to Russia, because it has lost the war in Ukraine. And the only way the United States can save face, the only way Trump administration can save face right now, is to engage in a different kind of relationship with Russia while still continuing the war for as long as it can be continued. And so it really is a desperate situation for the Trump administration. I hope that people understand that tariffs are not about strength. the economic impact that they will have will not be beneficial to them. The world already understands this, which is why if these tariffs are to hold, if they are to maintain this level of severity, we're going to see a mass exodus from the US's unipolar world to a degree that will even be greater than what we saw under Biden, which, quite frankly, was astounding in and of itself because of the shockwaves of the Ukraine conflict and how that led to the massive expansion of BRICS and a massive repudiation of sanctions. We will see the same thing with tariffs because the world doesn't want to be bullied into deindustrializing, into essentially paying tribute to the United States. That is really not what much of the world needs. The global South, the poorest countries in the world, the poorest people in the world, what they need is better livelihoods. They need prosperity. They need peace. And that is something that is being offered by one part of the globe, which is the rising multipolar world, and being completely rejected and not only rejected, but waged war against from the US led unipolar side.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point about with the recent military exercises in the Philippines. I think we all know that the Philippines have been in the U.S.'s corner really for as long as the first war between those countries started, and you can even see after World War II the relationship that Japan has had with the United States, even though that now with their new leader in Japan, we're seeing a little bit of I'm not going to call it resistance. I'll call it a nudge. I'll call it a I'm not the 51st state kind of mentality. But like you said, they're participating in the military drills in this Balikistan. But then you also see that earlier this year, China, South Korea, and China also are expanding on their free trade on the free trade agreement in that area, and we can see that China is starting to look towards their local neighbors like South Korea and Japan and other ASEAN countries, as I've mentioned before. So it's interesting to consider how Japan is kind of balancing the potential economic consequences of not trading with China or having a hostile relationship with China, but also the many military bases that are on, the many United States military bases that are in Japan in particular. So recently, I shouldn't say recently, but there's going to be, now that Brazil is the president of the BRICS chair, they're going to be hosting a meeting in Rio coming up. And in particular, the economic part will be about these tariffs. So I guess we all know that each nation's relationship with another is completely dynamic and there's no real way to there's no uniform really way of expressing the relationship with one another. It could be caused by a lot of things. But how do you imagine countries both within BRICS? How do you think that they are going to respond to these tariffs? Do you think it should be more of a collective measure, or do you think it should be more of a decentralized bilateral measure?
Well, what we can expect from the BRICS Summit is probably more. It would be more significant than maybe we would have thought, given that it comes not even a year since the last BRICS Summit, which saw a pretty significant expansion. We had, of course, recently we had Indonesia join as a full member, but we also had 9 partners join up into what now is a new partner relationship that smaller countries and countries that are seeking to join BRICS can engage with as they build up a relationship. And as BRICS also gets its own structure, decision making process, and all of this together to facilitate an even greater level of economic cooperation and also cooperation on all fronts. So, because of these tariffs, and it's not just the tariffs, the United States' position in the world as an empire has necessitated a kind of full spectrum economic war that includes tariffs, it includes sanctions, and it includes just its own dominance and control over the financial structures that ultimately shape development, debt, and whatnot. So those mechanisms like the IMF and the World Bank that have wreaked havoc over the last 40 plus years to indebt and impoverish, especially countries in the global south, all of these forces, and not least also mention the pressure that actual military warfare is placing on global south countries to move away from the US's role in the world and the US's diktats. All of this is placing immense pressure on countries in and out of BRICS to begin the process of, we could call it diversification. Because as you mentioned, relationships between countries and relationships with BRICS inside of BRICS, it's very complex. These countries do not have all the same economic, social, or political systems. They're trying to come to a consensus and an agreement on what fair, just, and cooperative development really looks like in a multipolar world. And so I think what we can expect is that all of the above are going to be discussed, but I think there's going to be a huge emphasis on accelerating the use of the currencies of respective countries. For example, China and its partners, Russia and its partners, BRICS countries using their own respective currencies in trade and in economic development in their relationships with themselves, and dropping the SWIFT and dollar dominated system itself, and going through that process. That is what I wholly expect from BRICS coming up. And many people have wondered, well, will BRICS come up with its own currency? Will there be a complete facilitation of de-dollarization? And while that may not be in the cards at this moment, really what is at the core and foundation of all of this is the need to develop a new economic order itself, where the currency is simply one of the means from which that development can take place. And it's because of the dominance of the dollar that it hasn't taken place, at least in large part. It has been the weaponization of the dollar. It has been the domination of the dollar as the reserve currency, which has been so effective, actually, in keeping countries from being able to develop to their full potential, keeping them from full economic sovereignty, and turning the post-colonial era, the so-called post-colonial era, into one dominated by neocolonialism, where most countries in the world, the poorest countries in the world, what's called the global south or the former third world, most of them are actually under the servitude and the thumb of this dollar dominated world financial system led by the United States. So the tariffs, along with the sanctions, along with the ways in which the United States behaves around the world as an imperial albatross, just destroying anything that decides, anyone and anything, any government, any country that decides to move in its own way, that is going to accelerate in this coming BRICS summit the process of, yes, de-dollarization, of moving away from the US led economic order. Now, what that looks like, it could look like many things. We could see another round of expansion. We could see countries like Saudi Arabia finally make their decision whether they are going to actually join BRICS. Somehow, I doubt it, given the fragile and very complex relationship with the United States that Saudi Arabia has. But the fact that we're even talking about it shows that the world has changed quite dramatically. We know that Vietnam, in its state meeting between Xi Jinping and the leader of the Communist Party of Vietnam, they discussed, and in Vietnamese media, they discussed the possibility of Vietnam deepening its relationship with BRICS, and already it's considering becoming a full partner country. So all this is to say is that I think we can expect, especially Asia at this moment, which will be hit the hardest by U.S. tariffs on China. They will be seeking diversification, and that wholly means there's no other possibility here. That means deepening their relationship with China, which completely upends, mind you, it completely upends. It destroys entirely. It puts to rest any possibility of the U.S.'s overall strategy of containment, because that strategy of containing China and weakening China is dependent upon these so-called alliances. But these alliances are going to fall apart. Every single one of these Asian countries, including Australia, which likes to see itself as a European country, are so deeply connected to China's economy that any move to isolate themselves from it will lead to a collapse economically, politically, and more. So that is what we can expect. We can expect BRICS to strengthen, and this is despite Donald Trump's declaration that he was going to destroy BRICS, that he's already done so. He came into office not a month after he came into office. He said BRICS is destroyed. I threatened them with 100% tariffs, and now they're weak, and there's no more BRICS. He didn't even know that the S doesn't stand. No, it doesn't stand for Spain. It stands for South Africa. But all this is to say is that despite the bluster, despite the gaffes of Donald Trump himself, the strategy really is to divide and destroy BRICS. But what is happening each and every time the United States attempts to do this, every time that it attempts to weaken its largest players, the real leaders of it, which really are China and Russia, the more that this mechanism, multilateralism, and multipolarity as a whole, the more that BRICS and all of the and those that umbrella that it sits under in the rising multipolar world, the more they get stronger. So I fully expect that to happen. And it's going to be all of the above. It's going to be a deeper reliance on those countries that truly act like normal countries, countries that are not seeking, they're not seeking to um, to get tribute. They're not seeking to bully, to dominate, to destroy, to upend, to undermine the development of other countries. But no, China and Russia and others, smaller countries that make up the foundations of BRICS, they are seeking actual equal partnership. They're seeking what China calls win-win cooperation, and they're already putting it into practice. So that is what we can expect. And I think many people were worried about Brazil's, especially it has political turmoil. There's a lot of divides in Brazilian society, a lot of threats against the Lula-led Workers' Party there. But it looks like that the United States' own weakness, its own decay as a declining hegemon, is facilitating and accelerating this process of BRICS essentially taking over. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see, no matter how much Donald Trump thumps his chest and tries to push on and off a tariff button. It doesn't really matter. This is a process that really can't be arrested unless you blow up as I call it, you blow up the whole chessboard, which the United States is truly contemplating right now with its first use nuclear weapons policy and its obsession with trying to build up toward a war with two major powers in the East, the real leaders of the multipolar world, which have nuclear weapons themselves. This is ultimately what it's going to come down to when the United States, its oligarchy, its elites, when they realize that there's nothing they can do outside of destroying everything that will stop this process. But if they destroy everything, they also destroy themselves. This is the big quandary that this dangerous moment in the United States' empire's history is facing.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to hammer home a couple points that you really made there that are the essential of BRICS. It is an alternative to a system that, quite frankly, has failed everyone except for probably the richest 300 people in the world. Really, we see that between the constant proxy wars around the world, spanning constant countries, and still going on today in important BRICS nations near like China and Russia. You know, antagonizing Venezuela too, who is also interested. It's also rival or is next door to Brazil. There, it's the point of BRICS is creating that alternative where countries talk to each other based on mutual respect and reciprocity. It's not a being the bully situation that Trump and the United States has done, since the end of the Second World War, and you can even make an argument of them doing so, even further back. But yeah, the point is that Trump used these tariffs, and he has been threatening those with de-dollarization and those of similar mindsets because he knows that that's the last thing that the United States has that gives them actual influence on the world stage. And you see that even with the constant announcements of the tariffs, adding some, repealing them, changing them, everything of that nature, it is all showing that, like the sanctions that they tried to put on Russia, it did the exact opposite that they wanted it to do. All it's doing is it's isolating the United States itself, and it's allowing BRICS as an institution to prioritize the needs of not just the global south, but the people like you and me all across the world who don't agree with how the United States has weaponized the dollar and do other things to subvert developing countries to prosper. Thank you for listening to this presentation. This was a great discussion on the impact that United States tariffs will not just have on people like you and me, but also to the people around the world, and in particular the global south, and how BRICS will respond to it. Be sure to like and subscribe all of our followings that we have in the description below, our Telegram and such. And please be sure to follow Danny on his Substack and his YouTube channel, and if as well as his other articles.